We have some very nice strawberry shortcake.
Strawberry shortcake.
Oh my God, strawberry shortcake?
Those of us online, it almost doesn't really matter where you reside on Earth because American dishes will be shared on social media frequently without any real explanation of what they are. In fact, there's almost a level of assumption you should just know these dishes, and so today we are diving into one of them, strawberry shortcake. Hey there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sylvie and I'm a baker who has been studying the science, fundamentals and history of this industry whilst also spending hours in the kitchen for my website roamingtaste.com.
By the bakery. Wanted to pick up a shortcake.
Tour the stack. The happy union of strawberries and cream dates back to the 1500s, which is actually the same century as shortcake's origin. Because these dishes exist separately outside this dessert, we have a record of how the two facets of strawberry shortcake, the strawberries and cream, were first paired together. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, or rather his cook, is often credited with first serving this treat. The actual location this was first served still stands today. It is Hampton Court Palace, located outside the city of London in the UK. At the time, it had one of the largest kitchens in the country, and Cardinal Thomas had a close relationship with King Henry VIII. You know, the one that is known for three main things. He had 6 wives, which is actually linked to one of the best sayings for remembering historical facts. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Secondly, Henry created the Church of England to divorce his first wife. And thirdly, he was known for being incredibly gluttonous. For those who want to share other things about King Henry VIII, go ahead in the comments. Anyway, the reason for strawberries and cream even becoming a thing was thanks to King Henry coming to Hampton Court, and one of the Cardinal's cooks clearly didn't have enough time to prepare a more involved dessert, and so he coupled these two ingredients together for the first recorded time. This was worthy of note thanks to the article Strawberries and Cream, a Wimbledon Tradition with a long history, as dairy produce was considered peasant food, but if the king ate it, then everyone else was going to as well, and so the combination gained popularity. The strawberries that would have been served at this occasion would have been more of the wild strawberries that naturally grow in the woods even today in the United Kingdom, because it would be a couple of centuries before the variety we know and love today would have been created thanks to crossbreeding. I'm not going to go into any more of the strawberries and cream history because cream has like a crazy long dairy history, and strawberries, this is just not the time or place, but there will absolutely be an episode on strawberries in the future, especially because the British love this ingredient on an almost unparalleled level, and it's just worth going into because their love of strawberries is actually for good reason. Now let's get into the shortcake portion of this dessert, with the word being a kind of description, as short meaning crumbly from the Old English kruma is a term that came to be in the 15th century, adding a large amount of fat or shortening to flour, resulting in a crumbly or short texture. Quoting there from the article, What is the True Origin of Strawberry Shortcake? There is a connection in shortcake and shortbread, as the fat in both of these dishes is what creates that signature tender texture. And Tori Avery, in her article Strawberry Shortcake, A History and Recipe, reveals the first record of the term shortcake and the earliest recipe for it, an unleavened rich cookie, was in the anonymous Elizabethan cookbook The Good Housewife's Handmaid for Cookery in Her Kitchen, London 1588, the second printed English cookbook. Within a decade, Shakespeare used the term shortcake for the name a character in The Merry Wives of Windsor. Shakespeare named his character Alice Shortcake, for those interested. We see how shortcake came into its own from serious eats. In the late 16th century, author Thomas Dawson included a shortcake recipe in one of his cookbooks. It's remarkably similar to today's versions, calling for clotted cream or sweet butter, but recommending clotted cream more, though his also adds an egg yolk as well as mace, clove and saffron for a more spiced flavor. Adding spices was the norm at this point in time. One, they signified a level of wealth, but also there is like a whole layer there in regards to their understanding of the health we derive from food. A lot of raw fruits weren't eaten, they were seen with suspicion. So you could say that adding spices at that time is kind of the same way we would be adding vanilla extract expect today. There was the doty donut, the tender Ollie Kirk, and the crisp and crumbling cruller, sweet cakes and shortcakes, ginger cakes and honey cakes, and the whole family of cakes. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Washington Irving. According to the article Strawberry Shortcake by Restaurant Hospitality in May 1995, American shortcake was first mentioned in print by Washington Irving in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1821. And according to Strawberry Shortcake, A History and Recipe by Tori Avery, a transitional stage in the development of the modern strawberry shortcake was strawberry cakes found in the June 1st, 1845 issue, page 86 of the Ohio Cultivator Columbus, which entailed a thick unleavened cookie split layered with fresh strawberries and covered with a hard sugar and egg white icing. Cover the whole top and sides with an icing made in the usual way of beaten white of egg and powdered loaf sugar. Although already raspberries were offered as an alternative and soon sliced peaches, strawberries would remain the preference. Before the icing is quite dry, ornament the top with whole strawberries. 2 years later, and shortly after the lady's receipt book, leavened shortcakes emerged as the most popular pastry for American strawberry cakes, although still made without whipped cream, and immediately the term strawberry shortcake took off in America. And we see this further cemented into what we know it as today, with a June 1862 issue of the Guinness Farmer Rochester described a strawberry shortcake made up of layers of soda biscuit, fresh berries, sugar, and cream, with Wikipedia noting that a similar recipe appeared in Jenny Jones' American Cookery Book 1866 by Jane Cunningham Crowley, the first known cookbook by a black woman in the United States. A Domestic Cookbook 1866 by Melinda Russell also contains a recipe. The several features represents a wider audience being introduced to this dessert, and a few years later, with the advent of the new Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, the shipment of California strawberries on ice contributed to a surge in popularity of shortcake throughout the country. Quoting again from the incredibly detailed Strawberry Shortcake, A History and Recipe by Tori Avery. One of the most fascinating elements in the journey of strawberry shortcake is how it established itself in Asia, specifically Japan. Now, strawberry shortcakes are also consumed in Korea, but it was much harder to track down information around this, so I'm just going to be speaking about Japan here. In 1912, a Japanese chef named Fujirenemon traveled to the US and discovered an iteration of strawberry shortcake that used sponge cake, strawberries, and whipped cream, quoting from the delicious evolution of strawberry shortcakes there. The sponge referenced in that quote is clarified thanks to Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Projects. A strawberry shortcake might consist of soft, fluffy chiffon-style sponge filled with fruit and cream. Light, fluffy cakes is something we see very much beloved in Japanese desserts, or even with the sandwiches filled to the brim with cream and a pretty line of strawberries down the center, or even a mixture of fruits. Though there are different origins for these desserts, Japan and the United States had quite an amicable relationship, particularly in trade during the 17 and 1800s, and this decreased somewhat in the early 1900s when things soured towards Chinese immigrants, and then this expanded to Japanese immigrants with the Japanese exclusion in the 1920s, and then that was followed by Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. This is relevant as it wasn't until after World War II, as Japan and the US mended their relationship and engaged in more trade, yogashi became more accessible, and this unique descendant of strawberry shortcake became just as popular as its ancestor is in the States. Nowadays, strawberry shortcake is particularly popular at one particular time of year in Japan. Christmas cake is widely consumed during the holiday season in Japan, inspired by Western desserts known as yogashi in Japanese. Quoting there from The Delicious Evolution of Strawberry Shortcake, the chiffon-style serving of shortcake resembles the fact that at times this dessert has been served alongside or on top of sponge cakes or angel food cakes in the United States. And actually, in fact, there are a lot of people who still serve strawberry shortcake with a cake base, though it's most often served in one particular way, and that is what we're going to dig into in the next chapter. Shortcake. The true shortcake is neither bread nor a cake nor a pastry, though bearing what might be called a differing likeness to each. It is a modernized form of the pan dowdies of our grandmothers. May 1894 issue of the New England Kitchen, Boston. We first need to ask, what defines a shortcake? This is a particularly relevant question when we consider over the years sponge cake, angel food cake, and puff pastry have all been used as the base for strawberry desserts. And we see how many across the United States made this dish their own in the article Strawberry Shortcake, A History and Recipe. In the 20th century, many Americans, especially Northerners with little familiarity or experience with soda biscuits, developed a preference for substituting pound cake, angel food cake, or hot milk sponge cake as the base. My traditional method when covering a recipe or a dish is to do a bunch of research and then find the common ground and ingredients to then find the scientific ground within those ingredients to then share it with you so that you're better informed and then can maybe make better dishes in your own kitchen. When considering strawberry shortcake, this becomes a little messy. As to some, this is a cake served with buttercream and strawberries. In fact, you could actually say Victoria sponge cake is a type of shortcake. As summed up by Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Projects, over time shortcake has evolved to take on several forms. So to define what shortcake is, we also have to factor in its role in the dessert. Thanks to the article Strawberry Shortcake, A History and Recipe, shortcake proves the ideal base as it is firm enough to stand up to the juicy berries and damp cream and absorbing only some of them without losing its identity or becoming a mushy mess. These days, the American strawberry shortcake usually features a biscuit filled with fresh cream and macerated strawberries. Quoting from Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Projects Substack there, which will be featured a lot in this episode. Ultimately, what defines a shortcake and what you are most likely to find 9 times out of 10 when you're searching images of this dessert is an American style biscuit, which is, you could say, a cousin to the scone, which has a tender but somewhat dry texture, which makes it a perfect base for the other components of this dessert. However, there is also another facet to consider before we actually define this properly, and that is the height of the shortcake. This is also one reason why either cake or this American style biscuit works, because they've both got enough body to hold the toppings without getting soggy or falling apart. We're going to come back to the different bases that act as a shortcake, but for now, to settle on a standardized shortcake, we're going to say that it is this type of quick bread. So, is there actually a difference between American biscuits and shortcakes? Well, according to Southern Living, yes, there is a difference. Where they differ is that shortcakes typically contain a higher amount of sugar, baking powder, and sometimes an egg for a fluffier result than standard biscuits, making them perfect for dessert applications. This is where I did do some research to consider what makes a standard shortcake with 8 recipes reviewed and all calling for all-purpose flour and baking powder, with a further 50% of the recipes also calling for baking soda alongside the baking powder. If a recipe includes an acidic ingredient like buttermilk or sour cream, they help the baking soda react, creating carbon dioxide. This helps the rise during the baking phase. In the case of the Kitchen Projects shortcake, there is no acidity in the dairy used, but lemon juice is stirred through the cream, which is acidic, so helps provide the necessary chemical reactions for that rise as the shortcakes bake. Additionally, baked goods brown better in an alkaline environment, and this is created when baking soda is added. So this helps to give the shortcakes a beautiful golden exterior alongside butter, sugar, eggs where they were called for, and flour. Plain or all-purpose flour has an average protein level of 10 to 12%. Now this can vary country to country, so it's best to search what yours is nationally, but this protein level of 10 to 12% is what contributes to a tender texture that helps achieving the ideal bite and the color in our baked goods. Lower protein amounts result in lower browning, whereas higher, that's how you end up with those really nice dark colors on the exterior of a bread, because it's usually made with a flour with a higher protein content. Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Projects recommends you should generally try to use the lowest protein all-purpose flour you can find to maximize the tenderness of the shortcakes, though you'll have a delicious product regardless of what you use. The ideal texture here is one that is tender but it can hold itself together, which requires you mix the dough together until no dry portions remain in the edges of your bowl. But Southern living reminds us to avoid overworking the dough to keep your shortcakes light and tender. Work quickly to keep the cold bits of butter intact for the flakiest results. We're going to come back to making the dough, but whilst we're on the topic of flour, there was a quote I discovered in my research that really stuck out. What remains from a settler diary in the New World as per PBS SoCal? We cannot set down foot but tread on strawberries, wrote one Englishman. Native Americans crushed the bountiful berries with cornmeal to make a cake that might have served as the inspiration for the first strawberry shortcake. Some shortcakes include cornmeal, minimally so, but they still are there. This historical use of cornmeal cakes to serve up strawberries by Native Americans links to the continued use of cornmeal in shortcakes. And it's clear Bronwyn Wyatt understood this because she did some further testing in her recipe. In the spirit of treating shortcakes as a blank slate, I subbed 20% of the all-purpose flour for both cornmeal and buckwheat. 20% is generally my go-to for adding in alternative flours without changing the structure of a baked good too much. Both of the nubby yellow cornmeal and the nutty buckwheat shortcake offered their own charms. I could imagine pairing a cornmeal shortcake with fresh peaches and a buckwheat shortcake with plums, for instance. Bronwyn doesn't just provide a base for strawberries here, but also a recipe that you could absolutely amend slightly to have a dessert from spring all the way through to late summer using seasonal produce. A cornmeal shortcake would also taste exceptional with a homemade blueberry and or blackberry jam, or fresh apricots macerated with some sugar and lime juice. I mean, those would pair incredibly well together, or you could even say peaches with lime juice. Anyway, for anyone who's not already acquainted with Bronwyn, I highly recommend following her on Instagram. Her handle is Bayou Saint Cake. I will absolutely be including a link to that in the caption below. She is so incredibly knowledgeable. She does actually have some cake classes you can buy, and she is publishing a book in 2027. Moving on from flour, all of the recipes in my research use sugar in the dough, with 2 not specifying, but the remaining 6 using white or granulated sugar, which they're the same thing. I think it was only one recipe that said white sugar, all the rest said granulated. But these are both refined sugars that add sweetness to the dough without adding any other flavors. These sugars, because they don't add other flavors, also help bring out the flavor from whatever dairy is used. And if vanilla extract is called for, that is also a way that the vanilla extract flavor, even though it's minimal, will be more pronounced. In 7 of the 8 recipes, butter was called for in the shortcake dough, with the butter being rubbed or cut into dry ingredients until it resembled coarse crumbs. This process helps coat the flour to inhibit gluten formation. You could say it kind of like provides this protective outer coating, and then that way when you add the other wet ingredients, ensures that the mixture retains its tender texture whilst you're mixing it and then as it bakes. This isn't a video about biscuits. I will absolutely be doing one of those in the future. I love biscuits. I've made them so many times. They're one of the 2 things that sustained me during the pandemic, mentally, for sure, mentally. But ultimately, most of the scientific testing has been done around biscuits because they are used far often in American cuisine, savory and sweet applications, and therefore most of the next section is going to be from biscuit testing, and so there will be a lot of biscuits. Those are American cousins to the scones. This is actually the best place to start to then reflect on what each of these brings to the table and then what it contributes. With butter, King Arthur Baking puts it well in how else it affects the biscuits. Butter contains a bit of water, which helps create steam and gives baked goods a boost. Like biscuits, dairy is included in virtually every shortcake recipe. In the 8 recipes in my research, 5 called for cream, with 3 of those calling for heavy cream, 1 for half and half, and 1 for double cream. The biggest difference between these 3 is actually the fat content. As per Eating Well, half and half combines equal parts whole milk and heavy cream with 10.5 to 18% milk fat content, whereas heavy cream is between 36 to 40% fat and double cream is approximately 48% fat. fat. Though these can be used interchangeably here. They both provide this really like beautiful tender texture, but we're going to come back to that in a second. 2 of the 8 recipes call for milk, with 1 actually calling for buttermilk powder. So you could actually say just 1 calls for milk. And we see how these interact thanks again to King Arthur Baking. This whole section is just sponsored by King Arthur Baking. Milk and half should yield very similar results, with the half and half biscuits just slightly more tender. The remaining 2 shortcake recipes call for buttermilk and sour cream separately. So we're going to look at all the dairy ingredients in these recipes and compare results. King Arthur Baking notes that buttermilk is known for making biscuits tender and adding a zippy tang. And Sally's Baking Addiction adds, buttermilk offers similar acid levels as sour cream, a bit more even. Thus, it can offer similar effects. In the case of the recipes for buttermilk and sour cream, these are both acidic, so it can help add a nice color to our baked shortcakes, whilst also helping them rise during the baking phase, and they help to give us that beautiful tender crumb. Because sour cream is acidic, but also high in fat, Neve's Kitchen in their Baking Institution post notes that sour cream adds a velvety, creamy texture to baked goods. Its high fat content contributes to moistness in cakes, muffins, and quick breads. Baked goods made with sour cream tend to be tender and soft. This helps provide like a midpoint between heavy cream and buttermilk, with King Arthur Baking noting in their tests, the heavy cream biscuit is slightly paler than the other 3, while the half and half version is the evenly brown. The buttermilk and sour cream versions are somewhere in the middle in terms of color, nicely caramelized around the edges. Butter and buttermilk biscuits that are delightful in all ways you'd expect a biscuit to be, and a little lighter than their heavy cream counterpart. Buttermilk biscuits are flaky, creamy, and downright comforting. In King Arthur Baking's tests, they found the rise in their biscuits was pretty consistent, with the buttermilk biscuits just a smidge taller than the rest. So overall, the texture and flavor of the biscuits, or in our case the shortcakes, would be very similar. Just think of what you want in your final baked result. A shortcake recipe calling for milk will have a lighter color than probably all of the others, and it would likely be less flavorful overall when compared with using the other dairies and shortcakes. When cream is called for, the flavor will be light, and it also will be complementary, whilst sour cream or buttermilk will add a slight tang that works to complement the strawberries and cream. Honestly, I would probably bake with any of these 3, a heavy cream, a buttermilk, or a sour cream. I think they would all add complementary notes, and so what you have on hand or what is easiest to source would probably be the best here. Lastly, only 1 of the recipes in my research used heavy cream without rubbing in butter prior to the dough, so it had no butter in the dough. So this effectively is one of those where you just stir all the dry ingredients together and then you add the wet ingredient. Some shortcake recipes might call for this method, but the one thing I need to say is that I couldn't read any reviews on this one, so I can't see how the texture or overall flavor of this one was when compared with all the rest of the recipes. Half of the recipes in my research called for an egg in addition to the dairy. This addition not only helps bind the ingredients to create this beautiful cohesive dough, but also provides moisture and leavening for a slightly higher rise, which Bronwyn Wyatt noted when she made a batch without the addition of an egg. To be fair though, 4 of the 8 recipes in my research did not include eggs. However, 2 of those were drop biscuits and 1 was baked 1 large piece of dough. So if you prefer something simpler, this might be a better recipe to follow than one that recommends folding and stacking your dough. 5 of the 8 recipes in my research included vanilla extract in the dough, with 1 replacing extract with lemon zest. Vanilla is this incredible natural pairing for strawberries and cream and adds beautiful dimension, whilst lemon, when it's added to the dough, the acidity adds a great combination also, because it means that the flavor of the biscuit might be slightly lighter and allow the richness of the toppings to really take center stage. When it comes to making the dough, the most consistent advice across all the recipes was to keep your ingredients cold. In fact, I recommend you can cut your butter and then return that to the fridge and stir your dry ingredients together, particularly if it's a warm day. 7 of the 8 recipes rubbed or cut the butter into the flour and then added the dairy and or egg and the vanilla extract where they were called for. Only one of the recipes covered the dough prior to baking, which really reflects how quick this should all come together. 2 of the recipes in my research actually laid and stacked the dough to create those nice layers. We're going to come back to that because there's a great little comment there. When making the dough, you want to work fast. And if it's a warm day or your kitchen is really hot, it's best to chill the flour and butter mixture if that is what your recipe calls for. Chill that before then stirring in the other dairy, and then once you've formed your dough, chill that again because you want the dough to be as cold as possible. And if it's hot in your kitchen, the butter, because butter has a low melting point, it will naturally soften. It could potentially lead to your dough being a little slightly greasy, and then it might not bake as nice. The key when adding the wet ingredients to the dry is to not whip your mixture. So there's a saying that aligns perfectly when making one of these quick breads, whether it's scones, biscuits, or shortcake, that I often repeat to myself because sometimes when we are thinking we need to work quickly, we tend to work more frantically, and that is not what we want to do. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you repeat that to yourself as you're doing this, it helps you work with intention. You're controlling your movement, and this leads to faster results with a successful outcome instead of failed shortcakes or biscuits or scones that then mean you have to redo a whole new batch and wasted time and effort. Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Projects notes with the stacking method, this final stack meant the shortcakes could be easily split in half with a fork, preserving the craggy texture of the split rather than sliced biscuit, perfect for soaking up strawberry juice. A nice crack in the edges of a shortcake or a biscuit is a helpful marker on where to lightly pull it apart to create this nice rustic base for the toppings. There are so many facets to shortcakes, and one is where you use a biscuit or cookie cutter or simply cut into squares with a knife before or after baking. I think one of the recipes in my research, you cut circles into the slab of dough, but then you baked it all together and then you just pulled it apart after baking. If you're following a recipe where you have to cut it out with a biscuit or a cookie cutter, it's most helpful to form your dough into one nice uniform piece of dough. Try and make it as even as possible on top because you want to roll the dough out so you can cut out as many shortcakes as possible in that first roll, and then you have minimal re-roll because the more you have to re-roll or handle the dough, the tougher it will become once baked. Also, this piece of advice from King Arthur Baking matters when we consider what we're using to cut our shortcakes out with. For highest rising biscuits, use a sharp biscuit cutter rather than a drinking glass. A sharp cutter cuts the edges cleanly rather than mashing them together. A sharp cut allows the biscuits to rise higher. Some bakers recommend baking the biscuits packed tightly together within a skillet or in a baking tin with edges, such as the recipe from Sally's Baking Addiction. This will help them rise better as they can't spread outwards, so they end up spreading upwards. If this has been an issue or something you want to avoid, that's just something to consider. The last piece of the shortcake puzzle lies in the temperature to bake the cakes. So much of the final texture goes into the temperature, with the 8 recipes in my research ranging from 400 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 to 232 degrees Celsius. The reason they bake at such a high temperature is to create steam from the butter and the other dairy, which helps the shortcakes rise as that steam evaporates. Additionally, another little tip here, try not to touch the oven door until it's as close as possible to when they will be done, because introducing cold air whilst they're in their rising phase could potentially lead to collapsing. Finally, some people like to glaze the tops of their shortcakes with milk or an egg yolk, or they like to sprinkle over some rough sugar like demerara. And you can absolutely do this, but it doesn't look like it's an essential. So unless you want a really golden top or you want a really nice textural difference with with a sugar coating, it's not really that necessary. And when it comes time to serve, some people spread a little butter on their shortcake base. It could be infused with like orange zest or ground cinnamon. Some people apparently love this and they find it's like the key secret ingredient, and it could potentially mean you have to do less with your strawberries because we're going to get a little in depth there. But this is just a little something to know and was really helpful in the article from King Arthur Baking, How to Make a Great Strawberry Shortcake, which will be linked below in the caption.
Berries and cream, berries and cream. I'm a little lad who loves berries and cream. Berries and cream, berries and cream. Oh, I'm a little lad who loves berries and cream.
Strawberries. We've spent a bunch of time on the shortcakes because they're like the most involved part of this dessert, but honestly for me, they're just a vessel for strawberries. And one of the most fun pieces about this dessert was learning many Americans would hold shortcake parties every year to enjoy the new crop of strawberries and celebrate the imminent onset of summer. In 7 of the 8 recipes, the instructions began with the strawberries, tossing them with sugar in a process called maceration. The definition of macerate is to soften or become softened by soaking in a liquid. Now, this is a type of cooking without using heat, as the fruit softens from its original texture and then also loses some of its moisture, but then that moisture, because there's sugar, it then gets soaked back into the fruit in this like nice, soft, like cohesive mixture. 4 of the recipes simply call for stirring the strawberries with sugar, helping draw the ambient moisture out of the fruit, with 2 further recipes adding lemon juice, which also helps draw out further liquid and adds dimension to those juices because, as I mentioned, the juices then get soaked up by the fruit. Most recipes recommend macerating for as long as possible whilst you're making the shortcakes before serving, with the kitchen suggesting macerated strawberries can be covered and refrigerated up to 24 hours before serving. The longer they sit, the more their flavors will concentrate and intensify. They'll also get softer and release more juices, so you may want to use a slotted spoon to scoop the berries onto the biscuits to avoid a soggy shortcake. The most important detail in that suggestion is that if you like a strawberry with a bite, or you like fresh, like crunchy produce and its more original texture, you need to factor in how long you want to macerate for. Usually the sweet spot for strawberry shortcake is around an hour to 2. Any longer, and especially if you're doing it for 24 hours, you will end up with fruit that is more jammy in texture than its original texture. But if that's what you love, go ahead, do 24 hours. Just be mindful of what you want to create. In my research, Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Project Substack was the most detailed, beginning with the scientific base flavors of strawberry. A fully ripe wild strawberry might have fruity aromas shared by peaches and pineapple, backed by bracing esters, also responsible for the sense of caramel, pine needles, bay leaf, grapes, and citrus. When we consider strawberries in this dessert, we're probably thinking about the bright, slightly acidic flavors within them. There is something so delightful about their aroma and taste, but when we consider the flavor, we might not be able to understand the nuance within it. If we buy strawberries from the supermarket and we didn't or couldn't smell them, and we're tossing in the recommended amount of sugar from the recipe we're following, and this pivotal element is lackluster, it can kind of make or break the whole dessert. Bronwyn breaking down these nuances means even if we have those circumstances, like she often does, we can bring out the best notes with just a little extra work. Bronwyn macerated some supermarket strawberries with a little sugar and a splash of pineapple juice, let them sit for an hour until their juices were drawn out and tinged pink, and then reduced this liquid with a few bay leaves until it was thick and syrupy. I then added a couple of drops of orange blossom water. The result was remarkable. The liquid tasted alive. Another option, if we don't have the time or the ingredients to replicate her efforts, and also cooking down the strawberry syrup might just seem one step too far for us, we can also do something else. We can add our sugar, and balsamic is similarly rich in methyl and threnolite, which also gives a ripe strawberry its fruity scent. Therefore, balsamic will create a similar reaction and depth of flavor. You can absolutely also add little little sliver of fresh ginger to your strawberries or sprigs of fresh mint alongside the sugar. Or can I just say, if you do nothing else, a sprinkle of ground cinnamon. Several years ago, a coworker suggested adding ground cinnamon when I was making strawberries and cream. Life changer. Cinnamon is a natural sweetener, so it just like clings to the fruit profiles in the strawberries, also cuts through the richness in the cream. It's just incredible and so severely underrated. It should just be common knowledge. We should all be just doing this all the time. One recipe in my research added one ingredient to the maceration that differed from all the others. Southern Living recommends optional almond extract. Now, strawberries and almonds are from the same family. They're cousins in the rose family. So this would also add a nuance and depth and dimension to the fruit with really minimal effort. I know I've just thrown a lot of suggestions at you, but effectively, yes, strawberries and sugar work together great, but with a little extra work or a few extra ingredients, you can take this dessert to the next level. I also need to note, as a New Zealander, we are the laziest English speakers on the planet. I want to say we're the laziest speakers on the planet, but I can't speak for all languages. And so we are notorious for shortening words. Like, it is a part of our culture at this point. And saying strawberries this entire time is such a mouthful because I call them straubs. Yeah, I say straubs. That is all I say. And so today I'm taking one for the team. On to the cream. Of all the elements in this dessert, the cream is the most simple to create. No recipe in my research suggested using store-bought whipped cream, or if you're in the United States, nowhere was it mentioned to use
Cool Whip? Cool Whip, yeah.
Cool Whip either. Only one of the recipes in my research didn't include sugar in their cream, and 4 of the recipes specified granulated sugar for the cream, with the remaining 2 calling for powdered sugar. Now, granulated and powdered are exactly the same, except powdered is just ground finer. Sugar acts to stabilize and sweeten the cream. For those who whip their cream without sugar, I do that most of the time probably. Bronwyn states her opinion in the Kitchen Project Substack, where she compares unsweetened whipped cream to unsalted food. Sugar can help also cut through some of the richness in the cream. Now, I know I've just said that a couple times. Cream is very heavy on our palate. And I mean, I'm from European, like Northern European livestock, right? Like, I am made for consuming cream. I'm so grateful for that. But a lot of people really struggle with dairy consumption, and cream is particularly one of those triggering foods. And so if we can have ingredients that kind of cut through that richness, it can make it more palatable. 5 of the 8 recipes in the whipped cream also called for a vanilla extract. An additional recipe for the whipped cream included lemon zest, and one called for both extract and lemon zest. Lemon zest contains oils that acts as a light infusion in the cream and pairs well when served alongside the strawberries. I mean, there are so many like lemon cakes with strawberries, strawberry cakes with lemon frosting. This is for good reason because they work really well together. They balance and add dimension to each other. In another video I did recently on posset, I really dive into infusing cream because I'm very passionate about that. You can absolutely check that out here. Creams with lower fat content, such as whipping or single cream, are helpful in one particular way. The lower fat content means the cream won't break or turn to butter as quickly as higher fat versions. This means you can whip the cream without stressing of whipping to the point it's thickened beyond that nice fluffy whipped cream stage. You know, the one where it looks like it's slightly curdled. Whipping until soft peaks where it just holds itself together is easiest. That allows you to spoon soft lashings of whipped cream on top of your strawberries. Most of the recipes in my research recommended whipping the cream just prior to serving, though Southern Living suggests whip the cream fresh before using. A cold bowl will help it whip up faster. To keep this dessert stable for a longer period of time, consider adding mascarpone, creme fraiche, or cream cheese to the whipped cream to help stabilize it. With Bronwyn Wyatt from Kitchen Projects advising, when I was still dolloping cream on a restaurant line, we would whip the cream till it had just thickened and store it in a tall metal container with a balloon whisk. We'd then re-whip the cream to order to ensure it remained velvety and supple rather than stiff and grainy. You can absolutely use Bronwyn's advice here and prepare the whipped cream in advance and with a little re-whip just prior to serving because it will separate just a little. The last thing that feels worth mentioning in this chapter is that it is abundantly clear which order the elements of this dessert go when we are plating up to serve. Shortcake, strawberry, cream. That cream will cling to the juices and sweetness of the strawberries whilst also complementing both the fruit and the shortcake to create this like beautifully well-rounded taste on our palate. And this is why fresh whipped cream is so pivotal here. Magic in the rustic. There's something so charming about strawberry shortcake. The fact that no two plates are exact. The crags on the edges of the shortcake, the level of strawberry syrup that's soaked into the base, the dollop of whipped cream on top. Each is as individual as the people it's being served to. Described beautifully in the article, The Murky Origins of Strawberry Shortcake from Mashed, there is nothing frou-frou or hoity-toity about strawberry shortcakes, and that simplicity is one reason for its long-running popularity. And Rebecca Frey from Serious Eats reminds us that when it's time to serve, just remember that these are meant to be rustic, so don't fuss too much over a perfect presentation. Diving into this dessert led me to many iterations of how people make and or serve this, the types of ingredients they might add to their shortcake from spices to egg yolks, the comments of whipped cream and preparing the strawberries. Almost everyone who speaks about strawberry shortcake does so with a confidence in their own methods and it meets their standards of what satisfies them. There's just something so perfect in skewing all Google SEO language of what is best here. If all you have time for is buying some ready-made chiffon cake, strawberries and whipping cream because you've been given no notice for guests coming over, it'll be a hit. Or you have some spare sour cream in your fridge and you want something with minimal effort to go alongside a more high-maintenance dinner. People will light up. This quote from the May 95 Restaurant Hospitality says it better than I can. The remarkable thing about strawberry shortcake is that no matter how lumpy or misshapen it looks when it comes to the table, it still always looks festive, lavish, and quite special. And our coast's food, strawberry shortcake, reminds us that even if there might be a particular type of shortcake that is most well known, the boundary on what makes that base is pretty loosey-goosey. I don't believe a proper strawberry shortcake exists. The dessert seems more a matter of personal taste. Each version is authenticated by the nostalgia to which it is linked. This dessert is a reminder of the timelessness of rustic food, the types of dishes we don't necessarily feel compelled to pull out our camera for, but it provides comfort when served and reminds us to live in the here and now, enjoying the bounties of the present day and being grateful for the company of others. Strawberry shortcake's charm lies in its ability to be simple, messy, and so utterly perfect in its imperfection, exactly like the people we enjoy it alongside, creating memories that one day will make us nostalgic for the moments we're in right now. Okay, well, I'm now off to make Strawberry Shortcake. Thank you so much for your time. I would love to hear what your favorite memories are when consuming strawberry shortcake. Please share in the comments. I think that's really what the beauty is of food. A few years ago at work, I was chatting to co-workers about making Victoria sponge cake and the amount of nostalgic stories they each had and the different ways they all enjoyed this simple dessert that you can find at the supermarket with really minimal effort. It was just so enjoyable to hear. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, please like, share with anyone who will enjoy it. Subscribe so that you can be notified when the next video is released or dropped. I don't really know what to say there. I have to say my original goal was to publish an episode every week, which I seem to be failing at because it is actually so much work to create these scripts. I do everything without AI because I need to craft what I'm crafting through my brain, and it's a mental challenge, but I would not be doing this the way that I can without using my brain. So all of the work for these videos, research to script writing to editing the videos, all of it is done without AI, and it requires a lot of thought process, a lot of how do I structure this in a way that is like digestible, and I'm hoping that you enjoy it. Even though I'm not going to be releasing videos every week, I hope that you still stick around. There are so many desserts that I want to get into, so many ingredients that I have yet to delve into. And so in the meantime, I will see you in the next one. Ka kite anō and tschüss.